And our next story is a COVID update because it's real easy with everything else that's going on to forget that 4,000 Americans right now are dying on the daily from COVID, sadly, kind of as predicted for January. And those numbers are probably going to continue to get worse as we move towards the end of the month. Couple of things here, which I just want to jump in. This is a good time. Our mods and admins are not paid. Nobody here is paid. We are paid with hearts. And so if you really appreciate independent media, like the stories that you're hearing, this is a good time to spam those hearts. Spam them up on Facebook, Twitter, and Periscope. If you're watching us on YouTube or Twitch, you could just do a long line of hearts or like I love you mods, and they really appreciate that kind of stuff. The other thing is we are aware that Jennifer's camera is a little we got some bandwidth issues. There's nothing we can do, so we're just working through it. Jennifer, why don't you give us our COVID update?
Oh, it was so hard to sum this up in 5 facts because there's so much going on. But I'm going to do my best. So yesterday, CNN reported that the U.S. reached the record for number of COVID-related deaths at 4,197. This is the highest death toll since the beginning of the pandemic, and the overall death toll now rests at about 386,000. Earlier this week, this is fact number 2, WHO, the World Health Organization, declared that herd immunity would not be attainable this year due to the issues with the vaccine rollout and vaccine administration. Fact number 3, earlier today, NBC reported on a new U.S.-specific strain of COVID that is far more contagious and believed to be behind half of the nation's COVID infections. Number 4, both Dr. Fauci and Eli Lilly expressed concerns earlier this week that the South African strain of COVID has more dramatic protein spikes that raise questions about both vaccine efficacy and the efficacy of antibody treatments given to people recently diagnosed with COVID, meant to help them recover faster and avoid long hospitalizations. And fact number 5, as of today, 3 U.S. lawmakers, including Bonnie Watson-Coleman, Pramila Jayapal from Washington, and Brad Schneider, have tested positive for COVID after sheltering with other unmasked lawmakers during the Capitol insurrection. Good news, though, and hopefully it passes, Biden introduced details for his $1.9 trillion stimulus plan today, which includes $160 billion to bolster vaccination and testing efforts.
One of the things that jumped out at me on these 5 fast facts in the $1.9 trillion package is that Republicans all of a sudden, as we predicted, care about the national deficit again.
Oh, yes, of course. We're back to worrying about the tab, which seems like a really, I mean, it's kind of their thing, especially when there's a Democratic president. But it just seems like such a bad timing to be worried about that when you're basically on the verge of an economic crisis as a result of a global pandemic that was basically ignored by the previous administration. Now is not the time to be worried about purse strings, right?
Right. Yeah, the Trump administration in 3 3/4 years, because we don't know what the deficit growth will be for this final quarter until a quarter after he leaves. His deficit growth has been $7.1 trillion. Now, I know that the chuds,
cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers,
are going to quickly say, yeah, but Obama grew at $8.6 trillion. He grew at $8.6 trillion over 8 years, and almost all of that was in the first 3 years because he was given a completely destroyed economy when he became president of the United States in early 2009, inheriting the worst economic, actually the second worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, because Donald Trump gave us the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression.
Yeah, exactly. And for some reason, that rationale just falls on deaf ears. With Trump supporters, there's a big difference in 4 versus 8 years. And the fact that, you're only talking about really slightly less money over the duration of Trump's 4-year term versus Obama's 8-year term. The facts just don't add up to them for some reason. I don't know why.
And for the records, Chuds, I didn't vote for Obama either time. So, no, you're an Obama lover in the comments. Sorry, Chuds. The other thing I will toss out there is that Obama was willing to work across the aisle that he essentially took the Bush economic recovery plan, the Bush economic recovery architects, put them in his administration, and largely just executed the Bush 43 plan.
Yeah, exactly. Again, those kind of facts fall on deaf ears when it comes to Trump supporters, because it just doesn't align with the narrative that they've created.
Yeah, it doesn't. The other thing that jumps out at me is this growing chorus, right? We had this thing with Sir John Bell maybe about 10 days ago about the South African variant and his concern that it was resistant. Well, you won't want to say that the vaccination won't work on this strain, but it is more resistant on this strain. And we're starting to see a chorus of voices starting to say this.
Yeah, and it's not just the vaccine, it's the antibody treatments, right? Because of the different types of protein spikes that are on the South African strain. And as of now, I was looking before we went on air, they haven't seen any of the South African strain in the US that I'm aware of. But with the way in which it's traveling and, you know, the rate of contagiousness of these new strains, it's only a matter of time before it comes here. And the fact that we now have a US specific strain that's accounting for half the cases in the nation is really troubling, because how long before ours starts to mutate in that same way?
The other thing that I think people need to understand is when you have something increase in its virulence, its ability to spread, or I should say its contagiousness, but the virulence doesn't increase, that is actually when you get a lot of problems, because you get this very fast spread that makes people really sick, and people that are hospitalized and need all these drugs and need oxygen and 4 people to help keep them alive. If you look at a disease, say like Ebola, the reason we've never had like a global outbreak of Ebola is so lethal that it tends to kill the hosts that are carrying it around. And so it has a harder time getting this really rapid community spread like we see in a disease like COVID-19. Yeah,
no, exactly. And again, this just goes back to, you know, we haven't even begun to see the cases that have come out of the insurrection. If you, watch the video, the majority of those people are not wearing masks. How many people did they come into contact with? How many people did they potentially spread it to if they were infected? So there's a whole lot of unknown variables at this point, and it just reinforces the need to wear a mask to protect yourself and to protect others, and to continue to abide by social distancing and hand washing and all of the protocols put in place, because, you know, who made this very alarming statement earlier in the year that earlier this week, that we're not going to reach herd immunity this year. That's a whole nother year of having to continue these practices. And when people don't follow those regulations, that further prolongs, you know, our isolation and, you know, economic downturn and all of these things that are profoundly affecting people.
Yeah. Washington State has the highest mask compliance in the United States. And that, I'm like, really? When I heard that. But apparently we have the highest mask compliance in the United States. Jennifer, thank you so much for that update. We're going to go ahead and roll a spot, and then we're going to go to story number 4.
Okay.
To the side. Music has a power greater than words can really express. Some birds sing a song to me. Let me know where I'm supposed to be. It's such a shame, yeah. Well, I was your TV girl. The EP is called Blue, and my website is classicelishamusic.com.
I just want to say I want COVID to end sooner so I can have a production engineer in the studio here with me again instead of having to be chief cook and bottle washer. Classic Alicia's album is available on the website. It's also available on Bandcamp and in iTunes. So if you use a iDevice and you have iTunes, it's literally just a button click to download her EP, Blue. If you go to, it's $13. If you go to her website, you can get a CD with a bonus track, and that CD is $15. She has an amazing voice. She is an amazing spirit. And we feel so privileged that we had a chance to literally amplify her voice back on August 9th when the weather here was much nicer.
I'm not going to complain. The last couple of days have been fairly nice and really made me long for spring again. But then, of course, I was reading a COVID article and they're like, it could intensify again in spring when people get out more. And I was like, oh, great.
Yay. One little thing actually before we jump into your story, which I actually feel is good news on COVID. And I think people are going to be a little surprised when I come up, when I mention this. The state of Washington has finally stepped back on what I think was a mistake in their interpretation on outdoor seating, and that restaurants that have like the large garage doors. So in Kirkland, there's George's that's like that. There's also the Bungalow where they have the large garage doors that they could open up and just let the air circulate in. As long as people are sitting at that row that is on that open and exposed side, and there's like some cross circulation, those restaurants are allowed to have indoor seating again. It's very limited seating, no more than 25%. They can't sit people further back. But I know a lot of people are just very happy about that because people are craving for some semblance of normalcy. But I will say, eating at a restaurant is one of the highest vector points for getting sick.
Yeah. It's definitely nice to have that little bit of normalcy back as long as people don't abuse it, right?
Exactly.